He's the Vice President of Confederation of Indian Industries and Indian Institute of Metals. He has a rich experience of over 30 years in the mining and metal industry. So the man with the metal is here. He was the co-chair of the Mining and Metal Governance Council of the World Economic Forum 2016 to 2018. I welcome you, sir, to the TEDx Kanke webinar series on the topic, We Also Make Tomorrow. Tata Steel Perspective Post-COVID-19. Sir, it's great to have you here. And since I'm born and brought up in Jamshedpur, as a young man, I grew up to the philosophy, we also make steel. Now there's a paradigm shift, and the present philosophy is, we also make tomorrow. So my question to you, sir, is, it has three subparts. A, what is this philosophy all about? B, why is it important? And C, how you are making it happen at Tata Steel. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Thank you all for having me as part of the session. It's my privilege to be here, and I always look forward to these opportunities to chat up, because it helps me also reflect through your questions on what we are doing and why we're doing it.
Thank you, sir.
I also hope all of you and your families are safe. I think these are challenging times. All of us need to be disciplined in what we do, not take undue risks, not put unnecessary pressure on the system, and work with each other to make sure that we come out of this crisis stronger as people, as companies, and as a country. So thank you once again for having me over. I go to your specific question. You know, it's a very interesting point, and I'm happy to reflect on why we did what we did. You know, Tata Steel, as you know, is 110 years old. Okay, and I think we have a rich history. We have a history of coming out of many challenging situations. We have a history of proving our critics wrong multiple times. So we have a lot to be proud of. And there are many things that Tata Steel has done, particularly in terms of people practices, CSR, etc., in addition to making steel, which we are very proud of. So when the tagline of "We Also Make Steel" was conceived about 30 years back, and that was around the time when I joined the company, the whole point was to communicate that Tata Steel is more than a steel company. It does a lot. Maybe people in Jharkhand know it, people in Eastern India know it, but not everyone in all parts of India know what all Tata Steel does. And that campaign, which resonates even today with people, basically demonstrated what Tata Steel does beyond making steel. And that was the whole philosophy of the campaign at that point in time. The second point to consider is companies which are a rich history like us, who are proud of our past, can sometimes get obsessed with our past. You know, there's this famous Indian academic in the US called Professor Vijay Govindarajan, who's written on Freebox, you know, approach, etc., for innovation. He made a statement once which said, a company which only talks of its past has no future. Okay, so I think it's very important to reflect on that and to say that, hey, if I only focus on my past, how do I create a future? Because our predecessors created a future, and that's why we are here today, right? Our predecessors did not sit back on their past. Our predecessors created a future. So as a generation of people in Tata Steel today, while we should celebrate the past, we should be proud of the past, we have an obligation to create a future. And so how do you pivot the thinking of this company to keep thinking of tomorrow, even as much as we are proud of yesterday? Okay. So when we were thinking, so there were a number of things we were doing a few years back, and that was also the time when we said, let's do a new corporate campaign. And whenever we did any kind of survey anywhere, everyone came back with "We Also Make Steel." Everyone remembers that line. And we said, okay, so one thought was, let's continue with "We Also Make Steel" and say things differently. But they said, no, that's a 30-year-old line. The youngsters of today may not relate with it. I mean, people of your age and my age may relate to it, but not somebody who's joined the company 5 years back or 10 years back, or likely to join the company in the next 5 years or 10 years. And when we thought about what are the youngsters looking for, the answer was really they're looking for a future. As much as they joined the company because they're proud of the past of the company, from their point of view, when they join the company, they're looking at what is the company going to do for the next 20, 30 years. So that's where my future is, you know, and it's not about what I did 100 years back, but what I'm going to do in the next 10 years. Hence, we said, okay, let's pivot around that line. We also make steel and change it to we also make tomorrow, because then you have that link which many of us feel with that old line, but you're forcing the organization to think about tomorrow. And there are a number of things to come to the third part of your question we've been doing over the last few years, which say that how do we make ourselves ready as a company for the future? So one is to make it structurally ready for the future. So there are some tough portfolio calls we are taking, restructuring, reorganization, transformation, so on and so forth, so that Tata Steel financially and structurally is ready for the future. The second part, which I think, and so that journey is going on, and one of the big parts of the journey is to say how can we grow the India business much faster, make it a bigger proportion of our total revenues. And hence in India, we've pretty much doubled in the last 7-8 years. We were 9-10 million tons, we are now 19-20 million tons, going to become 24 million tons. So that's made us structurally stronger for the future, and we'll continue to grow in India. The second part is how do we culturally be ready for tomorrow? And that's where, again, while we preserve parts of the culture we are proud of, and we want to preserve and strengthen, we also create new parts of the culture which is more relevant for tomorrow. How do you make ourselves a more agile organization? How do you make Tata Steel a more innovative organization? How do you make Tata Steel a more digital organization? How do you make Tata Steel a more technology-enabled organization? So many of the actions we are taking today are in that direction. It's about creating a future, creating an organization which is structurally and culturally ready for a tomorrow, and hopefully a financially much more kind of richer company from that point of view, so that the shareholders also benefit from all these actions.
Wonderful, sir. We've got some insight on exactly what you are looking to do at the philosophy when you say we also make tomorrow. So the next question that I have for you is, the Tata Group in general and Tata Steel in particular is not just a company. As I told you that since I've born and brought up in Jamshedpur, I know that it's much, much more than a company. It is an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem around which many stakeholders revolve, like the employees, the entrepreneurs, the youth brigade, the MSMEs, the SMEs, and even contractual laborers. And what Tata Group or Tata Steel does actually impacts their lives both directly and indirectly. What message do you have for them post-COVID 2019?
So I think everyone is dealing with the challenges in different way of this crisis, right? I think the most heart-wrenching stories are the ones about the migrant workers, the informal workers, people who depend on daily wages, so on and so forth. And it's much easier for many of us to sit and talk about how it has impacted us, but I think it's nothing compared to how it has impacted some of them. So one is, as a community, as a society, as a company, as a nation, I think all of us have to ask ourselves, what is it that we can do? And I think that is what, to me, is important. We can always advise the government on what they should do. The government should do what it has to do. But I think what is it that as individuals, as companies, is it that we can do to make a difference? And I think the Tata Group always, has a community in the middle of whatever we think about. I think the founding fathers, Jayant Tata, said that the community is not just another stakeholder, but the very purpose of our existence, right? So if you start with that philosophy, and I always qualify this by saying that I don't claim that we are perfect and there's no fault in whatever we do, but all I'm saying is we try quite hard to keep the community at the center of what we do. And hence the group has come forward and said a lot of things, doing a lot of things. It's not about writing a check, but about also making sure that medical equipment, facilities, support things reach the people. We are creating isolation centers, hospitals, so on and so forth. So I think all of us, irrespective of the challenges we face, need to give hope to the people who engage with us, do what we can to give them hope, tell people that, okay, these crises come and go, and we have to find ways to come out stronger to it. And so my message to everyone, you asked me what my message is. My message is be disciplined, be careful, be safe, but at the same time, accept the fact that this is not going to go away in a hurry. COVID is not going to vanish in 2 months or 3 months. Till you find a vaccine and everyone gets that vaccine, it will always be there. We have to make sure that we take due precaution. We have to make sure that slowly but surely we get on with our lives in as safe a way as possible. We need to change the way we live our lives in many different ways, but we have to prepare and then take due precaution. So be careful, be safe, and be confident that we'll come out of it stronger.
Great, sir. So, Mr. Narendran, how do we extend this philosophy we also make tomorrow for India? We would love if you could briefly explain how different sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, services, and the new age sector benefit from this philosophy of we also make tomorrow. How we can extend this to different sectors.
So, to me, every crisis is an opportunity. Okay?
Correct, sir.
And we should never waste a crisis. We should always look at what is the opportunity. While we deal with the crisis, we should look at what are the opportunities. To me, what are the opportunities out of this crisis? I think firstly, India will obviously now focus a lot more on health than it did before. So to me, it's very important that 1 minute. Yeah. So to me, it's very important that India, focuses on health. I think we have traditionally underinvested in health. So it's a great opportunity for us to recalibrate our focus on health as a country, as a government, also as individuals. I think many of us have taken many things for granted. I think it's a good time to reflect on how do we lead healthier lives. I also think it's a great opportunity for India to recalibrate on hygiene. I think after this crisis, everyone has got into a habit of washing hands. Deaths are caused because people don't wash their hands often enough, right? So these are one set of opportunities. The second set of opportunities, so there's one set of opportunities around the culture change, the change of focus or the recalibration of focus, etc. The second one is around the economy. What the world had been trending towards is more of localization of supply chains and value chains over the last 2-3 years. I think the trade issues between the US and China created questions about global supply chains. And more nations are starting to look inward, and this crisis will accelerate that thought process. India is one of those few countries which is blessed with a lot of rich raw materials, a lot of, at top of my industry, for instance, you have a lot of iron ore, you have some coal. If you look at many other industries, you have bauxite, you have oil, some gas. So India is blessed geologically. It is probably underexplored, but it's blessed geologically. India has a lot of talent, a lot of young demographic in terms of the workforce, a lot of educated people, and a potential market. So, it has everything that a successful and competitive value chain needs to have. The government of India has been working on the ease of doing business. I think they're also focusing on the cost of doing business. So if all this happens, India can actually create an opportunity out of this crisis, attract more investments into the country. We offer the scale that most multinationals want when they build local supply chains. And it's an opportunity for us to, become self-sufficient in many ways. So that's, to me, the second opportunity. And the third thing, it's a little bit more about how do you create tomorrow for the eastern region where all of us are from. Because as you've seen over the last few weeks, most of the migrants in the rest of the country are coming from Bihar and Jharkhand and Odisha and Bengal and UP and Madhya Pradesh to some extent. And to me, if all those migrant workers are coming back, migrant labor is coming back to these parts of the country, and they're going to be reluctant to travel long distances and go far away so easily, there is an opportunity for state governments to look at policies and to say, what is it that we can do about our policies which can attract investment in these states? Because one thing is, you have a lot of migrant workers who will be happy to work closer to home than they were earlier. So it is also an opportunity for Eastern region states to really look at policies and see how is it that we can once again work to attract investments. Because again, the Eastern region states, many of them are geologically rich in talent, rich in people, rich in resources, but it's just not been industrialized as much as the other parts of the country, and there's maybe an opportunity to do that. So I think we should look at framing policies which attract investments for India from outside and for Eastern India from other parts of India as well as from outside. We need to see how can we leverage the talent and the resources that we have much better. This crisis is also an opportunity to accelerate in technology adoption, both at a corporate level, at a government level, and at individual level. I think the number of meetings I've attended with the government on either Zoom or WebEx and things like that, it makes it so much more efficient, and I hope it continues even after the crisis. If we can have contactless dealings with the government, that's very helpful. For corporates, it's a great opportunity to adopt technology much faster than they did at the past, and at a personal level, all of us are also finding ways to socialize on the platforms that are available. So this is an opportunity to, in many ways, change our lifestyle for the better and create a much better tomorrow.
Wonderful, sir. We got some great insights there. Now, something on the personal front. Is this lockdown, in this lockdown, did you take your office home? If yes, what did you think work from home would look like? And can manufacturing sector push some of the non-floor work to work from home?
No, it certainly can. I've been pretty much operating out of home since the lockdown till maybe earlier this week. Not that I couldn't have come to office, I had the permission to do so, but I said, if I do that and everyone starts doing that, we are all unnecessarily maybe putting ourselves at risk. So while we have the permission to operate the factory because we are an essential service, we are operating it with minimum number of people required. In our offices, we have said, don't come unless you specifically need to. And so today, well, earlier if you didn't come to office, you had to take permission of your boss. Now, if you want to come to office, you need to take the permission of your boss. So in the factories, we are operating with a minimum number of people. We've taken all precautions to make sure that, people are not put at risk. And, but working from home is, been very extremely productive. And like I said, because of the technology platforms that we are using, so many meetings with government, with others in the industry, with customers, suppliers. I just finished a meeting just before this, where there were people from Singapore, from Switzerland, from India, from all over. And otherwise it would have meant a lot more travel. Every meeting in Delhi would have meant one day spent in Delhi for maybe 2 hours of meetings. But now we do multiple meetings in the same day. And so we are seeing productivity at a very, very different level. And I think this whole experience will help us take productivity of people, productivity of time, productivity of space to a very different level. So for me, work from home has been change. I didn't think I could work so many days at a stretch from home. I think it's worked quite well. Technology allows you to do that. And it's amazing. And I think it's going to change the way we look at work. If you look I'm in Jamshedpur, so we don't spend much time commuting in Jamshedpur. But if you think of somebody in Bombay who typically then commutes for 2 hours to come to office and do things which today they can do from home, the question later will be, do I really need to invest 4 hours a day to travel to a space to do things which I can do without that 4 hours of travel? And that really changes the paradigm of the workplace. So there are, of course, challenges. Not everyone has the space or the convenience to work from home. There may be distractions. They may not have the Wi-Fi connectivity that is required. There may be security risks. So there are many issues to sort out. But I think the mindset that when I'm in office, I'm working, and when I'm at home, I'm not working, I think the boundary between office and home, for good and for bad, gets more and more diluted. And it's not necessary everyone who's sitting in offices working all the time. And, so we need, it really allows us to look at how many people do you really need in the offices and factories to run it, and how can we make more productive use of talent who may actually benefit from spending some time at home. In India, for instance, a lot of very talented women are not in the workforce for different reasons. And maybe there's an opportunity to tap into that talent, even if it was only for 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, rather than not tap into the talent at all.
Wonderful, sir. So, could you kindly discuss your share of ups and downs in your journey? The young guys will take cues as to how you have written tomorrow in your own life.
I think everyone has had ups and downs. It may not be so visible. It's not so much that people have not had ups and downs. It's about how people deal with their ups and downs. Right? I'm in a cyclical industry, so as an industry, we have ups and downs. And I always tell my colleagues, don't get too excited when things are good, and don't get too disappointed when things are bad. So I think that's a philosophy which I've used in my life at a personal level also. Don't get carried away when things look good, because we oftentimes take the credit when things look good, saying that everything is looking good because of me. And when things look bad, you start blaming everyone else for it. Right? So I think if we are a bit more balanced about accepting that when things look good, it's not only because of our efforts, because sometimes things work in our favor. And the reverse is also true. When things are bad, it's not necessarily, it's maybe despite your efforts, things are bad, and maybe things are working against you. So one has to be a bit balanced. And I think in life, you will have many disappointments. All of us have had disappointments. There's a famous athlete who said that I worked very hard for 10 years and then I was called an overnight success. Because people see you only when you're successful. They don't see the hard work behind the success. So, and they don't see the disappointments. And I think people who succeed in general are people who pick themselves up every time they've fallen down. And one of my favorite lines is what I heard somebody say in a boxing match: it's not over when you get knocked down, it's over when you don't get up. So I think that's a philosophy which I would advise all youngsters. Don't expect life to be a bed of roses. Every time you will not be successful. Every time you fail, don't give up. Believe in yourself, back yourself, pick yourself up, work harder to make yourself better. And, hard work, if you have, like somebody said, luck is when hard work meets an opportunity. So you keep working hard, and the opportunities, when they come, don't waste them. And hopefully things will work out well.
Okay, that's great. So your life is a case study. What are the essential qualities you believe is important for?
Important for?
To look up to you.
I don't know if my life is a case study, but at least I think some of what I said, don't give up ever. I've had my share of disappointments. I've had my share of frustrations. Never gave up. I think kept at it. You should have faith in the system. You should have faith in yourself, and keep improving yourself, keep investing in developing yourself. Spend time to reflect on why things are not going the way you wanted it to. And, I think keep working at it. I think life is a collection of experiences, and you should learn from those experiences. And if you don't learn from those experiences, then your life will not change. So to me, I think be passionate about what you do. I tell people, work for a company. You look forward to going on Monday morning. If you don't look forward to going to your office on Monday morning, then maybe you're working for the wrong place. You should love what you do, because if you have to be good at what you do, you have to love what you do. If you have to be excellent at what you do, you have to love what you do. You can't be excellent and you can't be good at what you do if you don't enjoy what you're doing. So all these are important. And I think follow your own path. Don't do things because other people did it and they did well because they did that. Not necessarily you will do well because you did that. So ultimately, life is a journey of discovery. You discover yourself, and you learn from the experiences that you have. And always be a student all your life and keep learning from the experiences that you have. And I'm sure all of us will find our paths. And success means different things to different people. success is not just about climbing the corporate ladder or making more money. It's about doing what you enjoy most. And if you're doing what you enjoy, that's what is important. It's not about doing what other people think is right for you, but what you think is right for yourself.
Wonderful, sir. So now something very spicy and personal. Did this lockdown teach you to do something in the kitchen?
Well, not really. To be very honest, I'm staying alone in Jamshedpur. My wife is in Delhi and my daughter is in Bombay. So the needs at home are very simple, and I have some support at home who gives me 3 square meals a day, and so I'm fine with that. I think what I'm spending a lot more time at home now is I get a lot of time with my dog. I now spend most of my time in Bombay, so I've not been spending much time with her, and she's been missing me for the last 3 years. So I think now she realizes that I'm around every time she wakes up, so she thinks something is wrong. But she's happy to have me around, and I play a lot with her whenever I get the time. So I think that's the only thing that I enjoy doing, which has been a luxury, and I'm privileged to have the opportunity to do that thanks to the lockdown.
That was great. That was great. So, on a serious note, what happens to our plan to make 300 metric tons by 2030? How do you think we'll make it happen?
So the ambition is 300 million tons of steel for India. We are currently at 100 million tons. Okay.
Right, sir.
If you look at the steel policy document which the government released at that time, the big jump in consumption was to come from the spending on infrastructure. Okay. So the assumption, I mean, today out of 100 million tons, about 10 million tons goes into infrastructure. The assumption was that when you go to 300 million tons, 100 million tons will be spent on infrastructure. Okay. So while in all other consumption sectors like automotive and appliances and all the others, the government had taken whatever the industry had projected as a rate of growth. On infrastructure spend, the government had planned for exponential growth because most of that money was to be spent by the government. The government's announcements over the last few years has also been supportive of that. If you look at the money that the government has kept aside for infrastructure, it has been increasing with every budget. Now the challenge for the government today is how do you spend that kind of money when you're concerned about the fiscal deficit, the revenue streams are not there as much as before. So will the spending on infrastructure continue as planned even last year or year before? I think there are some indications that maybe they will, because that's the best way to kickstart the economy. That's the best way to, construction is the best way to get a lot of semi-skilled people back to work. It's the best way to make sure money flows to MSMEs. So if the government spends on infrastructure, then you have a better chance of reaching the 300 million target. If the government doesn't spend on infrastructure, pulls back on infrastructure, and the industry slows down and takes more time to recover, then it looks more like 200 or 250 million tons rather than 300 million tons. So it's a tall task in the next 10 years, particularly in the current environment, but I think India needs infrastructure, and that's the best way for us to not only create demand, but also reduce the cost of doing business.
That's great. So we have a question from the audience, from the people who have joined us on TEDx Jhanke webinar. There's Mr. Yashvardhan Jawar.
Yeah.
He's an industrialist in Ranchi. So, Kanika, can you just connect him so that he can ask a question from Mr.
Yes, I'm on unmute, sir. Thanks a lot, Mr. Narendran, for your insights and inspiration. I think all of us in the industry are suffering, and there is absolutely no prizes for guessing there. My question will be, what are the things that, kudos to the government for what they are doing to contain the spread of the virus. But what do you think that the government should urgently address right now for the industry at large, and maybe more specifically for the MSME sector, which really we have been hoping that something comes through?
Sure. No, I think the MSME sector and the informal workers and migrant workers, to me, are the most vulnerable in some sense, because Even if you look at the experience in China, the MSME sector got the worst hit. If you look at the experience in US currently, the MSME sector is getting hit. But if you look at the US, there are specific SOPs that have been offered to the MSME sector. Okay. Even in Europe, there's a lot of SOPs being given not only to the MSME sector, even to the larger companies in terms of wage support, right? So where the government is underwriting some of the wage bill of the MSME sector so that the people don't lose their jobs, or the MSME sector can pay the people even if they are short of revenue and liquidity. So these are some of the actions that other countries have taken. I talk as CII as well. We've taken up multiple issues with the government to support the MSME sector, because we believe that it's a very, very important part of the economy, and the part of the economy which needs support. So there are multiple things that we have taken up with government. One is to say that how do we make sure that the money owed to the MSME sector from the government, both at the center and the state, is paid, because there are a lot of dues. So while the central government has been taking some action, and when we have raised it multiple times in the past, they've shown how they're trying to clear dues. But oftentimes a lot of dues are also stuck at the state government. So they at the center says you have to take up with the individual states. The second request we have made to the government, as CII as well, and as other associations, is how is it that, is it possible for us to defer payments to the government? Okay. Again, many countries have allowed that. It could be your tax payments, it could be payments to railways or to any government agency, saying that, okay, yes, government also needs revenue, but this is not about waiving the payment. It is more about deferring the payment, right? So that also helps liquidity, because ultimately it's about how do you take care of liquidity during these few months. The third part is how do you make sure liquidity flows through the banking system? While the RBI has taken a lot of measures for money to flow from the RBI to the banks, how do you make sure that the banks, let that money continue to flow to the MSME sector? So here again, there have been a number of discussions. Can the government backstop? Can there be some guarantees given so that money can be lent more easily? Of course, the government has also supported with some moratoriums and things like that. So there are a lot of actions that we've been talking about. Some have come in, some more we need, I think. Of course, the government also needs to have a planned way to open up the economy, because like I said, COVID is not going to go away in 1 or 2 months. It's going to be around for at least 2 years till the vaccine comes and is available to everyone. So we have to recalibrate to a new normal and try to get on with business with proper social distancing norms, wearing the mask, and taking all precautions. So these are some of the specific discussions we've had with the government. I think the government is obviously juggling with the with the challenge of balancing lives and livelihoods. It's not an easy call, and every country has to find its own balance. It's not that lives are not important, but livelihoods also lead to life. So this is part which the government is grappling with. So I think the fact that MSME sector needs support is being voiced by all the associations, including CII, as we've taken up multiple times. Government is conscious of it, and I hope we'll see more and more action.
Thank you, sir.
I hope it's answered. Mr. Jhawar. Wonderful. Thank you, sir, for answering this question. Now I have a next question for you, sir, and it is from none other than Mr. Sunil Kumar Barnwal. So I request Kanika to unmute him, and so that he can ask the question directly.
Thank you, Narendran, for giving a great insight of what Tata Steel plans and how the country is going to address issues post COVID-19. I have two observations associated with the question. As you rightly said, see, the technology adoption will increase, post COVID-19. At the same time, we see now, a lot of industry will be finding out ways to manage the industry with less number of manpower.
Right.
As such, with the present guidelines, they are managing with 1/3 of the manpower. On the other hand, we see large workforce moving away from the industry back to the villages, where of course they'll have other problems of employment and all. My question is, how do you think the government should respond for particularly in the context of our country, where there is a huge youth population looking for employment, jobs. At the same time, we are now facing a situation where there will be huge employment loss because of the more technology adoption, as well as a lot of work industry aligning to work with the low manpower. And I'm sure in very short time it will be difficult to retrain the youth for a new kind of job. And I find primarily this manufacturing sector is going to have this issue. Though the primary sector like agriculture, mining is still continuing, and service sector is still managing with the technology. The manufacturing is the area where there will be huge employment loss because of more technology adoption and also the orientation to work with a less number of people. What suggestion would you have for the government and also for the corporates, because you are also in CII, to address this issue in context of the whole country? For the youth, how to retrain them, and also for the economy, how to create more job, maybe of different nature for the youth.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Banwal. Thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very important question, and it's a subject which keeps coming back every time there is new technology which comes in. I tell people when I joined Tata Steel 30 years back, and after my first 1 year in Jamshedpur, when I went to Tata Center in marketing and sales, the biggest department in some sense, or where there were maximum people employed, was what was called the typing pool. So there was a huge room with maybe some 80 people sitting and just typing. So we had to write and give a letter, and they would type and do it. And those days, if you remember in the 80s, when computerization had started coming, a lot of concern that these computers will take away jobs, right? And yes, right, it did take away some jobs, but it created lots of jobs. If you look at the Tata Group in 1988 or 1990, the two biggest employers in Tata Group were Tata Steel and Tata Tea. Tata Steel had 80,000 people. When I joined the company, it was making 2 million tons of steel and doing about 2 million tons of mining. Today, Tata Steel makes 20 million tons of steel in India, does 30 million tons of mining. We employ maybe 35,000 people, right? So it has grown 10 times, number of people have dropped. Tata Tea from 80,000 is down to 3,000 because the plantations have been hived off. It's more of marketing. It's now Tata Consumer Products. But look at TCS. This whole computers which may have taken away jobs from Tata Steel and Tata Tea. Today TCS employs 450,000 people. I don't know how many TCS employed in 1988, but I'm sure it must have been some 10,000 or 15,000 or something. So the jobs have shifted, from one sector, one industry, or even within the Tata Group. The Tata Group employs far more people than it did 30 years back, but in different companies. So some companies employ less, some companies employ more. I think that's a natural shift of markets, of technology. New jobs are created, old jobs are, some of them die, some of them get transformed. So I feel that this nature of technology coming in, improving productivity, creating new jobs, creating opportunities for people. You look at the entertainment industry today, look at the opportunities for talented youngsters, whether it is on, on television or on, on these streaming channels or whatever. So whether it's a stand-up comedian or a talented singer or a dancer, far more opportunities than there were 20, 30 years back, right? So I think new opportunities will be created. If you look at e-commerce, it's going to just take off. It's already taken off. And even today, I think I was reading in the papers that for people doing deliveries, the salaries are going up because there are not so many available. So there will be, to me, more and more new jobs created. Some industries will substitute labor with capital, which is what a steel company does. Each time you build a new factory, you will maybe use more capital, but use less labor. And there will be new industries created where there will be more labor required. So this is, to me, a natural thing. What all of us should be ready for as individuals is to constantly reskill ourselves in any small ways. 25 years back, I didn't know how to use a computer. Today, I can't survive if I don't use a computer, right? So to me, all of us have to teach ourselves new skills. Maybe 2 months back, I never used Microsoft Teams. Today, I use it multiple times a day, or whether Zoom or any of these WebEx or anything. You know, so for lots of meetings. So we have to constantly refresh our own abilities, encourage everyone to reskill themselves, however senior or junior you are, however mundane your job is, or however high-tech your job is. From government's point of view, I think governments need to accept that, need to recognize that, need to facilitate the transition, and need to create opportunities to not only, like I said, address the ease of doing business, which I think India, we've done a great job, but we need to do a lot more, because it's not about us being better than the past, but as being better than the other people who are attracting investment, other countries who are attracting investment. And secondly, the cost of doing business, because this is also something which drives competitiveness. I've said many times that you can force or you can encourage manufacturing to be world-class. You can tell Tata Steel you have to be the lowest cost producer of steel in the world and the most productive, which means I will use more capital instead of labor. But that competitiveness should not get eroded outside the factory gates. If the cost of capital is high, the cost of transportation is high, the time taken to unload a ship in the port is high, the time taken to move a truck from here to Bangalore to my customer is high. All that is cost which adds up. And in a country like India, where the cost of money is high, every day lost with steel produced but not sold is cost to the company. So I think from a government point of view, I would say government needs to look at the ease of doing business, the cost of doing business. Also, you know, I feel sometimes the government and industry and the society don't work enough together. Everyone blames the other, the industry blames the government blames the industry. But I think there is a need for everyone to come together and explain how each one has a role to play. Industry comes in, yes, they need land, and that is a sensitive subject, but hopefully they create jobs, you know. So these are the things that we need to plan for. The other thing I want to make is, if you look at labor, and India had all these migrant workers going to other parts of the country, I think what will be expected now from industry is that you need to create better working conditions and create better facilities for workers who go there so that they live in decent conditions. Obviously, the cost of labor will go up there, mechanization may increase there, but that may also create opportunities for Eastern region where investments may come, because migrant labor is available here locally, maybe cheaper than it is available in the West and North and South. So I think there will be a rebalancing, and it is for governments, like I said, in the East to now use this opportunity to look at policies, attract investments. If I look at a state like Jharkhand, you know, the state we are in, at least I'm in, there is no other state in India where there is everything from iron ore mining to automobile manufacturing. And the Tata Group is doing it. We are doing iron ore mining, we are doing coal mining, we are making steel, we are supplying to Tata Motors, who's making a truck. You can't have any more value addition. The iron ore and coal is in Jharkhand and the truck is being made in Jharkhand. Right? So that is the opportunity, you know, that is available in some of the states here. And so, you know, we should leverage that.
So I'm having a next question from Mr. Rohit Tripathi. So he's a tech guy. He'll be asking you a question. Over to you, Rohit.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Narendran.
Thank you.
I remember a trip with one of your predecessors, Mr. B. Muthuraman. We met on a flight from Rio de Janeiro to Dubai.
Wow.
Where
Okay.
he went to Brazil to kind of look for acquisition of some mining. I think probably it was a nickel or maybe steel mine, you know. But we sat together on the flight and we had a long chat. It's a long flight, and he was very excited about one of the acquisitions in Europe, Corus, which was a huge acquisition in 2008. And it came, like, it was huge in media too, and probably Tata Steel leveraged quite a bit for that acquisition. So I actually have two questions. First is, how did Tata Steel handle the Corus acquisition, given the fact that events later on did not turn out to be so favorable, especially with respect to Chinese overproduction? And second question is, how does Tata Steel manage to stay nimble and agile, given the fact that steel industry is heavily government subsidized in many countries, and it's almost a commodity, and it's not easy to compete. But Tata Steel has kind of survived more than 100 years. So what's the secret formula of surviving, given so much competition that comes in?
Sure. So yeah, so I will convey your regards to Mr. Muthuraman. He's in Bangalore now. He's retired and settled there. Yes, Corus was a big acquisition at that time because Tata Steel was 4 million tons of steel at that time, and Corus was 18 million tons. So we were the 55th largest steel producer in the world before the acquisition and became the 10th largest. So in terms of size and scale, it took us to a very different level. It's a different matter that 1 year later you had the Lehman crisis, the financial crisis, and obviously a lot of things, particularly in Europe, didn't work out the way we had thought it would, because steel consumption in Europe dropped. And I think it's only last year or year before last, it took 10 years for steel consumption in Europe to come back to what it was in 2008. So that was a challenge. So to me, everything has a context. At that point in time, when the steel industry was getting bigger and bigger, steel companies getting bigger and bigger, it was important for Tata Steel to become global in scale. And that was probably the last big asset which was available on sale at that time. And that call was taken. A lot of learnings from that. I think, obviously we've done a lot of heavy lifting over the last 10, 12 years. The European business, which was 18 million tons, is now shrunk to 10 million tons. In Europe, the UK business was less profitable, which was 10 million tons, which shrunk to 3 million tons. And the Netherlands business, which has always been profitable, is at 7 million tons. And the India business, which was 4 million tons, is today about 20 million tons. Okay. So from the India business, from 25% of the total business has now become 65, 70%. And the India business is a more profitable business. So the overall profitability of Tata Steel has improved as the India business has grown. And we have optimized the portfolio in Europe to the more profitable units. But that challenge continues. Ours is a tough industry, the cyclical industry, as you implied in your second question. So the issue with the steel industry, traditionally, it has been seen as a strategic industry. So, for a long time, governments always felt that they have to produce steel. In the Western world, the mindset shifted and governments got out of making steel, whether it was in Europe, whether it was in South America and everywhere else. But in Asia, still there is a lot of government ownership in industry. While globally, the government ownership in steel industry was shrinking with the growth in China, that started increasing again. So that created a situation where you had a glut of steel every now and then, and whenever demand drops, you had everyone, it was a race to the bottom as far as prices are concerned. From a Tata Steel point of view, I think Tata Steel has constantly reinvented itself. It has constantly accepted that it needs to keep improving in an industry like this. In the 90s, it decided it has to be one of the lowest cost producers of steel in the world. And it became that by the end of the 90s. Even today, it is one of the lowest cost producers of steel in the world, the India business. We are in the top 5, I would say, in the world. The only people who may be the lower cost producer than Tata Steel are the Russians, because they also have iron ore and coal. And the ruble has become very weak over the last few years. So it was some 35 or 40 rubles to a dollar. Now it's about 75. So on a dollar basis, the costs are good. So Tata Steel has always stayed competitive, continues to stay competitive. And in an industry like ours, where the prices go up and down, you have to be the last man standing. Oftentimes, we confuse price and cost. So when China sells at a low price, it's not because they are competitive. It is because they sell at that price, don't make money, and they're okay with it. So today, you will be surprised to hear that India is exporting steel to China, whereas in 2015, China was dumping steel in India. So whether in April, all the Indian steel producers, whether it is Tata Steel or JSPL or JSW, all are exporting steel to China, because China has recovered quite fast after the COVID crisis. And because iron ore and coal prices have been reasonably high, they find it better to buy semi-finished steel from India, which is actually the right thing to do, because India has the raw material and India can produce semi-finished steel and finished steel at highly competitive costs, but may choose to sell at whatever price it can. So I think Tata Steel has constantly reinvented itself, stayed agile. We still feel we are not agile enough, innovative enough, maybe innovative and agile enough to be one of the best in the industry, but that's not good enough for us. We have to keep changing and keep staying ahead of the curve. We compare ourselves to companies outside our industry and try to keep improving ourselves and not be happy saying that we are better than many in the industry.
Thank you so much.
I'll take the last question from the audience. And can I connect to Mr. Rajan Kamani?
Yeah, hello, how are you?
Hi Rajan, you can ask me the question in Jamshedpur sometime.
I'm in Jamshedpur only, and we have no choice. But we are lucky that in Jamshedpur it's still green zone. We've been trying to fight with the government that they should open up Jamshedpur instead of keeping it closed, because we are not in the red zone or we are not in the orange zone. And I believe that I spoke to Saryu Rai today, and he says that probably by tomorrow they'll open up and make Jamshedpur like the rest of the country of green zone. So, see, my question to you was that the way things are going, I think because it's a long drawn out crisis of COVID-19, it will take almost a year or maybe 18 to 24 months, before the industry will be able to come back to the position which it was maybe 2 years ago or 1 year ago before the crisis. So what do you feel is the position going to be for the auto industry, which is for the next 2 years? You feel that it will drop substantially than what it was doing in the past? Or will the drop be almost like 40-50%, or will it be more? Because this is going to impact a lot of jobs in the economy. Yeah. And having said that, if it was going to affect a lot of jobs, what are the alternatives for people who are coming in from outside, like the migrant laborers in Jharkhand? Is another question which I thought that maybe you can share some light on.
Sure. So auto industry obviously has a slightly tricky future, but I think the jury is still out. So let me give you two sides of the prospects. So one is obviously even in China, for instance, the auto industry dropped, but it started picking up a bit. So if I divide the auto industry into the vehicles, passenger vehicles and two-wheelers. So one school of thought is, given this whole concern about hygiene, social distancing, people who used to take public transport but can afford a two-wheeler will now start buying two-wheelers, saying that I don't want to risk getting into a bus or getting into a train or something if I can afford a motorcycle or a scooter, if not a new one, a used one. So there is a view that there will be some demand because of that. It may take some time. If I look at one part of the economy which is going to struggle a bit to come back is the shared economy. Because again, people are going to be far more concerned about hygiene. So there is a view that a lot of people who used to share a car, if they can afford a car, may buy it. Because there are a lot of youngsters, for instance, who are not interested in buying cars because saying that I can always call a taxi. But today, that youngster may think twice, may say that, hey, maybe I'm safer off in a car than, using a car which is used by somebody else. So there is that part. So some of these actions I feel may be positive for demand, but the other side is people will postpone expenses which can be deferred, and so may say, hey, I can afford to buy it next year, buy it this year, let me conserve cash. So that decision will also be dependent on jobs. If I've lost my job, I'm certainly not going to be buying a car or a two-wheeler or anything. I'll wait till I get a job. That's why more and more governments across the world, whether it's in Singapore or in Europe or the US or anywhere, try to pay people during a crisis, or try to pay companies during a crisis so that they pay their people, so that jobs are not lost. If jobs are not lost, consumption is not postponed, and so the demand comes back much faster. If I look at commercial vehicles, again, a lot of it started, I think, slowing before the crisis because of these overloading rules, because of liquidity not available, because of the NBFC issue. But if construction and infrastructure starts as the government wants it to, then again, I hope that there will be a bit of an upside for commercial vehicles. But I see auto to take at least 6 months to 2 to 3 quarters, if not 4 quarters, to really come back to anywhere close to normal. This is my view.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your question. Sir, I have 2 quick questions for you. When do you expect a V-shaped recovery to begin? Number 1. And number 2, we are seeing a lot of companies moving out of China. So what should India do to...
I've lost the second part of the China question. What should India do to?
That a lot of companies are interested to move out of China. So what should India do to attract most of these companies?
Yeah.
Because Vietnam and India are 2 close competitors. How should India, position itself?
So on your first question, whether it will be a V-shaped recovery is also, I wouldn't assume that. Yeah. I would think the second half of this year, we will be closer to normal than now, but not all sectors. There will be some which are obviously will take some more time to recover. Let's say aviation, hotels, automobiles, etc. There are some who will continue to do well, like pharma or consumer goods, e-commerce, etc. If we handle the situation well, I think next year, which is 21-22, next financial year, would be a good year. Okay, so if I look at the V, I would look at the upside in the V coming next financial year rather than this financial year. This financial year, if we catch up, I mean, now the GDP forecast, which used to be 0 to +2, is now more towards the negative side, right? So, I mean, if the GDP is dropped significantly in Q1 and Q2, you need a lot of recovery in Q3 and Q4 to even come back to the GDP levels of last year. As far as China and investments moving out of China is concerned, there was one wave which moved out when the US and China were having a trade war. And we missed the bus on that one. I think most people went to other countries, right? Particularly Vietnam and Laos and many Southeast Asian countries. India, obviously, we have to work harder, because any investor who is setting up a factory for exports, if he's setting up a factory to sell in India, then you can maybe create more conditions for that person to come here more easily. Not least by saying that, hey, I will have import duty on mobile phones, so you have to build a mobile phone factory here. That is one way of doing it. I think electronics manufacturing has really taken off in the last few years. But otherwise, if we have to get investors in, we have to really look, like I said, at the ease of doing business, the cost of doing business, the unnecessary oversight we have sometimes on some things which should be left alone to the industries. There are also softer issues. The other day in a CII discussion, one of our senior members said, who deals a lot with foreign companies, he said many companies also look at the quality of schools. They look at the quality of nightlife. They look at the quality of, social life or whatever. Because if they want good managers to come and live here, they look at all those conveniences also. So if the pollution is very bad, if the quality of schools from an international point of view is not so great, if you have too many restrictions, on restaurants and pubs and whatever, because it's not about morality, it is about what is it that people look for and why do people go to a Singapore or a Hong Kong or other places to, even for that matter in the Middle East, why do people go and live in Dubai as compared to other places in the Middle East? Because Dubai has a freer kind of environment than most other places in the Middle East. So when you look at attracting expatriates, attracting investors from overseas, one really needs to understand what is it that they look for beyond the cost of doing business, ease of doing business, lifestyle choices that their employees have to make. And we have to then create a package that is attractive for them. So I think there's a lot to do for us and we can do it, but a lot of hard work is required.
As far as the scheduled time is concerned, we are already there 1 hour. But if you permit, I'm having a lot of questions. If you can take 2 more quick questions.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. So the next question is from Kanishk Poddar. He's the bicycle mayor of Ranchi and co-organizer at TEDx Kake. So he'll ask one question to you.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for being part of this event. We are privileged to have you and listen to your perspective.
My pleasure.
So my question is, this COVID-19 has made many things which we never thought as a new normal. And work from home is one part which is now a new normal. And many companies, especially in the IT sectors and service sectors, have shown their intention to bring down 50% to 75% of their workforce, and work from home mode is going to be the new mode for them. Where do you see Tata Steel into it? Will you go forward with your employees working from home even after the COVID-19 ends, after a year, slowdowns? And what do you think MSME sector will work like? Will there also be an option for them to take up work from home as the new normal for them?
So I think there will be far greater acceptance of work from home than before. Okay, so Tata already had a work from home policy, but you were given that permission as a special case, right? So if you had some issues, you sought permission and the job could be done from home, you were allowed to work from home. So we had some flexibility on that before. But we asked ourselves if this company could run for the last 2 months with most people who used to otherwise sit in office working from home, then we really need to reflect on, should it be by exception or should it be part of a policy to say, I don't care where you sit as long as you do your work. So we are reflecting on this. Obviously, we need to look at all aspects to it. Not everyone will want to work from home all the time, because there may be people who don't have that luxury of private space in their home to be able to work without disturbance. So there may be many who may not want to work from home. There may be many who are happy to work from home because they have that flexibility. So we are very clear we're going to be more and more flexible on some of these things. Our HR team is developing what would be the right policy for it. Obviously, the factories, we will need to have people coming in, but again, the question is how many people will be there. How can we, have the minimum number of people required so that we reduce the risk to them. One of the advantages Tata Steel has is in the last 3 years, we spent a lot of money on the IT infrastructure. So we are able to do it. So when you ask me about the MSME sector, it's not so easy to just work from home unless you have the right IT infrastructure, the ability to access all your office, systems, have the comfort that the security is not compromised, cyber security is not compromised, the broadband connectivity in the people's homes are good enough, so on and so forth. So I think the MSME sector, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of space you can release. And particularly if you're an MSME working in a big city, I'm sure there's a lot of office rent you're paying, a lot of time spent by employees in commuting, and if you can save that time, maybe you can also tap into talent who you couldn't tap into earlier. Like I said, there may be very talented people for personal reasons who are sitting at home because they can't spend 8 hours outside their home. Now, if you give an option that anyone who can give me 4 hours a day, I'm willing to hire on a work from home basis, you may find a lot of very talented people who are willing to work for you. So the MSME sector can also tap into talent who may not have been available otherwise if they allow these kind of facilities. So I think it's a question of how you translate this into an opportunity. How do you rethink, your work processes? How do you expand your work processes to involve this? And how do you also create some protocols so that there is some, because one of the complaints I hear from people now during work from home is there is no difference between a working day and a weekday because everyone calls you at any point in time. It's a Saturday or Sunday or morning or evening because they assume that you're working from home, so you're available all the time. So one has to define some protocols.
Wonderful. Wonderful, sir. So the other philosophy you also make, what I understood is that to make that happen, to make tomorrow happen.
I can't hear you for some reason. It's very distorted.
Okay. So to sum up,
yeah.
To make the philosophy, to make tomorrow happen, we need to understand 3 different.
Mr. Sharma, I can't hear you clearly. Can you ask others to put themselves on mute? I can't hear you clearly. Maybe there's a lot of feedback.
Am I audible now?
Slightly better, yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So what I got from your talk was to make things happen, to make the tomorrow happen, we should go for three different things. We should free ourselves from our past. We should make ourselves available to the present. And only when we are available in the present will we be able to make tomorrow. Do you agree to this?
Yes, I kind of figured what you said. I can't say that I heard every word, but yes, I kind of agree to what you said. Because there's a lot of feedback in the... Maybe you should ask the administrator to mute everyone else so that there's no feedback.
Yeah, administrators, is everyone muted?
Yes, Santosh sir. It's only you and Narendran sir who are.
Okay.
Okay. So, so to wrap up, to make tomorrow happen today, what I was trying to summarize is we should free ourselves from the past. This will make us available for the present. And only when we are available in the present will we be able to make tomorrow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you articulated it well. I think don't obsess with the past more than required and keep thinking of the future and enjoy the present.
Great, so it was great to have you here on our PET series at TEDx. I'm sure many of our participants may have benefited from this talk, and many at Tata Steel and many in Jamshedpur will also be listening to it. Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for having you here. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.